The most dangerous lie you believe is that success is external. In reality, winning is a self-administered steroid shot, and you are chemically wired to become an addict. We call this the winner effect, and if you think it's about meritocracy, hard work, or destiny, you have fundamentally misunderstood human nature. Success is not a reward for virtue. It is a neurological state of dominance that radically alters your mind, minimizes your risk assessment, and guarantees that your next victory is exponentially easier to secure. This is the cold, evolutionary glitch that separates the true elite from the perpetually striving, and it begins the second you taste victory, regardless of how small or undeserved that first triumph might be. The winner effect is not philosophy. It is endocrinology masquerading as destiny. My thesis is simple and absolute. Human achievement is not built solely on ability, but on a primal biological cheat code that turns the first success into a self-fulfilling prophecy. This code is governed by two ruthless neurotransmitters, testosterone and dopamine. A loss floods the brain with cortisol, spiking anxiety, shutting down risk-taking, and reinforcing a pattern of withdrawal. This is the loser effect, learned helplessness distilled into chemistry. But a win, even a small, random one, flips the entire script. It immediately elevates your circulating testosterone, the hormone of confidence, aggression, and sexual drive, while simultaneously suppressing cortisol, wiping out the anxiety of the previous conflict. You are literally less afraid of the future because of a chemical reaction triggered by the past. If you are tired of motivational speakers selling you soft lies about effort and destiny, and if you are ready to look at the cold, hard science of human dominance, hit that subscribe button now. Because the truth is that the greatest advantage any high achiever possesses is not their IQ or their work ethic, but the fact that they are operating under a state of perpetual, chemically enhanced fearlessness. This is the psychological leverage of dominance. When your T levels are elevated, your brain's architecture subtly changes. The amygdala, the primal alarm center, chills out, making threats seem less urgent and confrontations seem less dangerous. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex decision-making, receives a strong, motivating signal. Go again. This isn't courage. It's a temporary pharmaceutical intervention triggered internally. The body is effectively saying, "This worked. We survived. Now maximize the resource extraction." In animal studies, particularly with species that form rigid hierarchies, like the infamous lobster, the winner's brain physically grows larger neurons in the circuits dedicated to status and aggression. When they fight the next opponent, they are not just relying on muscle memory, their very wiring has been upgraded. For humans, the implications are terrifyingly relevant. The person who wins the first promotion, the first major contract, or even the first argument is immediately operating with a profound biological advantage over their peers. They are more likely to take calculated, aggressive risks because their biochemistry has discounted the cost of failure. This is why the rich often seem to get richer with reckless ease. They are addicted to the escalating dose of the win, and their neurological programming is telling them that risk is now their greatest friend. But the real addiction is not to the outcome, it is to the process. This is where dopamine steps in, knitting the entire winner effect into a compulsive loop. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, it is the anticipation chemical. It motivates the hunt, the chase, the striving. The moment you win, the reward pathway is flooded, associating the entire sequence of events, the late nights, the high-stakes negotiation, the confrontation, with a massive internal reward. The brain screams, repeat the sequence. This is why true winners rarely retire happily. They are chasing the next hit of the chemical cocktail, constantly seeking out new arenas of conflict, not for the trophies, but for the internal pharmaceutical rush that confirms their dominance. What makes this particularly dark is that the winner effect is fundamentally blind to morality or external context. It doesn't care if you won fairly, by manipulation, or by pure luck. The chemicals still flow, the amygdala still quiets, and the confidence still elevates. Evolution simply selects for efficiency and dominance, not ethics. If cheating produces the chemical response of winning, then cheating becomes part of the reinforced loop. This biological indifference is the foundation of institutional corruption and the psychological trap of entitlement. When you have achieved repeated chemical dominance, you begin to confuse the surge of testosterone and dopamine with inherent superiority. You stop believing that you were lucky or that the system was rigged in your favor. You start believing that you are simply better and that the rules no longer apply to your chemically optimized mind. This transition from external achievement to internal justification is where the winner effect truly becomes dangerous. The suffering inherent in the winner effect stems not from the risk, but from the pathological dependence that develops when the baseline of normal human experience is permanently recalibrated upward. For the chemically dominant mind, returning to zero, a state of equilibrium, peace, or simple contentment, is no longer possible. The moment the immediate conflict is resolved and the congratulatory hormones begin to dissipate, a terrifying void appears. This is not the mild dissatisfaction that precedes the next goal, it is the raw, visceral terror of chemical withdrawal. The previously quieted amygdala, now highly sensitized, registers the absence of the chemical flow as an existential threat. The body reads the lack of dominance as impending defeat. The winner is not merely pursuing the next win, they are fleeing the catastrophic feeling of the trough. They become psychologically enslaved to perpetual motion, convinced that stillness equals death. This explains the grotesque phenomenon of the successful individual who cannot enjoy their success, who destroys their own empires, relationships, and even their health simply because the peak was not sustained. The system is designed for the chase, not the capture. The trophy is the most boring part of the entire ordeal. The corollary to this chemical flight is the brutal law of escalating stakes. The dopamine system adapts swiftly, requiring an ever larger stimulus to achieve the same internal reward. The winner effect becomes a hedonic accelerator, ensuring that today's victory, which cost so much and felt so profound, will register as utterly meaningless 6 months from now. The winner must therefore seek out challenges that are progressively more complex, more dangerous, and more destructive in their potential fallout. This is why a CEO who successfully navigated a hostile takeover now needs to break international laws or risk their entire fortune on a speculative gamble. The internal scale of achievement has been broken. They are not chasing profits. They are chasing the sensation of almost losing everything, because only that proximity to disaster triggers the required chemical defense response that feels like life itself. If these analyses help you decode the invisible psychological machinery driving the world's most intense players, consider subscribing. It is the only way to ensure you don't miss the deep dive truths that explain why the world operates the way it does, often irrationally. This relentless, escalating chase eventually enforces a profound psychological isolation. The winner effect trains the individual to view every interaction, every relationship, through the reductive lens of power dynamics. When you are chemically programmed for dominance, every conversation becomes a negotiation, every intimacy a potential vulnerability to be exploited, and every friend a competitor to be neutralized. Genuine collaboration and vulnerability, the foundations of human connection, become impossible because the brain has reinforced the idea that opening yourself up is synonymous with losing. The winner builds a gilded cage, a monastery of self-interest, where the only reliable companion is the adrenaline rush of conflict. They are surrounded by sycophants who reinforce their inflated self-image, but they are utterly and profoundly alone. This loneliness is the final, definitive price of the winner effect, the systematic biological sacrifice of belonging for the sake of perpetual, chemically reinforced superiority. They win the world and lose themselves, substituting the rich complexity of human existence for the narrow, repetitive, and ultimately empty loop of the next required chemical hit. The life of Howard Hughes is not merely a biography of eccentricity. It is the ultimate brutal case study of the winner effect reaching its psychotic endpoint. Hughes won everything. He conquered Hollywood, built revolutionary aircraft, amassed unthinkable wealth, and possessed the absolute power to dictate terms to governments and corporations alike. But the chemical imperative did not stop there. Winning the world was insufficient. He eventually needed to win the battle against reality itself. His ascent was marked by high-stakes gambles and breathtaking feats. His decline was an escalation of control that moved inward toward his own body and environment. He wasn't afraid of germs. He was pathologically terrified of anything he could not dominate. This is why the man who once piloted the fastest planes in the world ended his days refusing to cut his nails, draped in Kleenex boxes, living in the penthouse of the Desert Inn, surrounded by Mormon security guards, not as friends, but as utterly controlled extensions of his will. He didn't just isolate himself, he biologically enforced an absolute quarantine against the messy, unpredictable reality of human life. Hughes became a walking monument to the paradox that the more control you gain externally, the more desperately you lose control internally, until the only battle left is with the physics of reality itself. This toxic escalation reveals a horrifying truth about the modern winner. They do not just crave success, they demand objective, undeniable proof that the universe bends to their will. When the dopamine tolerance ceiling is shattered, the winner stops pursuing measurable goals and starts pursuing the manipulation of perception. They must enforce the narrative, because the narrative is the last frontier of control. If they say the sky is green, their subordinates must agree, not because they are sycophants, but because the winner's psychological stability now hinges on the total subjugation of external truth. The ultimate power move, therefore, is not seizing assets, it is seizing consensus. If this kind of intense analysis, which strips away the superficial achievements to expose the dark algorithms of human motivation, resonates with you and challenges how you view power, then take a moment and subscribe now. Supporting this work ensures that the deepest, often hidden truths about the world's power players continue to be unearthed and discussed without compromise. This pathological need to control the narrative explains the transition from the old-school robber baron, who merely wanted your money, to the new-school digital tyrant, who wants your belief. They understand that the chemical fix is temporary, but the enforced delusion of their own infallibility is the only sustainable fuel. The winner effect weaponizes charisma, transforming the individual into a magnetic vortex that warps the informational field around them, creating a cult of personality centered entirely on their escalating, biologically mandated demands. They stop seeking advice and start demanding affirmation, surrounding themselves with mirrors instead of windows. The financial risk is no longer the core addiction. The real drug is the moment when a room full of highly intelligent people agrees to suspend disbelief and act as if the leader's most irrational impulse is brilliant strategy. That moment is the peak hit, confirming the winner's ultimate achievement, the successful imposition of their inner world upon the outer world. But this success is terminal. It guarantees that the winner will eventually launch a catastrophic endeavor based on pure fantasy, because they have destroyed the feedback mechanism necessary for survival. The system they created to ensure their dominance is the very system that ensures their eventual spectacular collapse, usually taking vast swathes of human capital with them. The final stage of the winner effect is the transition from ambition to paranoia. As the stakes escalate, as the required chemical hit demands risks that truly threaten the whole enterprise, the winner correctly identifies that the greatest danger is not the market, nor the competitor, but the potential for betrayal from within the gilded cage. They know deep down that the relationships they cultivated are transactional and built on fear. The sycophants who affirmed their madness will be the first to sell them out when the madness finally threatens their own security. The winner effect guarantees that the end game is a siege mentality, where every success is immediately followed by a chilling calculation of which ally must be preemptively removed or neutralized. This is why powerful empires often crumble not from external invasion, but from internal purges and self-inflicted wounds. The paranoia of the chemically addicted winner becomes the structural instability of the entire organization. They are doomed to always look over their shoulder, forever haunted by the shadow of the competitive dominance they so desperately pursued, unable to distinguish friend from foe, because the winner's wiring dictates that, ultimately, they are always alone in the arena. They are a prisoner of their own victory. And here we arrive at the most toxic societal lie we tell ourselves about the winner effect. That the individual driving the collapse is a visionary or a genius whose methods were simply too advanced for the world to grasp. This is the ultimate narrative camouflage for narcissistic addiction. We romanticize the winner's dominance not because we believe in their grand strategy, but because we are mesmerized by the sheer, unbridled force of their will. We mistake a pathological inability to accept constraint for heroic ambition. The truth is, the successful tyrant, whether they wear a crown or hold a CEO title, is almost never an oracle perceiving truths others miss. They are merely the person who has managed to silence every voice, internal and external, that dares suggest they might be wrong. Their vision is often nothing more than the catastrophic belief that the subjective rules of their own mind transcend objective reality. This is why, when they fail, they are praised for having the courage to challenge the paradigm, rather than correctly indicted for the catastrophic hubris of mistaking a chemical compulsion for divine insight. Society actively collaborates in this deception, because deep down, we crave the simplified clarity of absolute authority. We prefer the comfortable lie of the infallible genius over the terrifying complexity of decentralized, humble competence. We want someone to simply tell us the future, and the winner, drunk on their own neurochemistry, is the only one arrogant enough to consistently deliver that fantasy. They are celebrated until the moment their fantasy burns the collective house down, at which point we briefly mourn the wreckage before searching for the next, equally doomed individual to project our dangerous desire for ultimate control onto. If you find yourself nodding along to this, if you recognize the cynical machinery beneath the gilded facade of power, then you understand why this kind of analysis is systematically excluded from the mainstream discussion. We only get surface-level hagiographies. We rarely get the autopsy of the soul required to truly understand how power corrupts. If you believe this uncompromising search for the underlying truth is valuable, take a second and subscribe now, because the system wants you distracted by the spectacle, not armed with the diagnosis. The winner's ultimate tragedy is that they never learn the difference between being successful and being correct. Success is a statistical anomaly. Correctness is a structural necessity, and the winner effect systematically dismantles the structure. To be correct requires humility and a rigorous engagement with contradictory data. The exact inputs the winner has trained their entire environment to filter out. Once the feedback loop is broken, the winner exists purely in a state of anticipatory defense, consumed by the zero-sum delusion that every decision must maximize their personal win state, even if it degrades the collective infrastructure required to sustain that win state. They stop competing against rivals and start competing against reality itself. This is why their final acts are usually bizarre, self-sabotaging crusades, the irrational acquisition, the pointless merger, the grand architectural project nobody needs. These actions are not strategic moves. They are simply the desperate escalation required to squeeze one last, dwindling hit of dopamine from a brain that has become entirely desensitized to normal stimuli. The winner is compelled to raise the stakes higher and higher, dragging thousands of unwilling participants toward an inevitable reckoning, all because their internal barometer for satisfaction is permanently broken. They are chasing the ghost of their first, purest victory, the moment they first felt truly unbound, but that ghost recedes exponentially with every subsequent success. That chase demands a complete psychological reorganization, a violent pruning of any trait that might introduce weakness. The winner, having repeatedly executed the high-stakes maneuver, stops seeing their success as a fortunate outcome of skill and timing and starts viewing it as a deterministic feature of their very being. Success ceases to be something they did and becomes something they are. This consolidation of identity around a transactional external metric is the moment the suffering truly begins. For the winner, failure is no longer a strategic setback. It becomes an existential threat, a dismantling of the self. This fundamental insecurity forces them to construct an impenetrable psychic bunker, guarded by layers of justification and populated only by sycophants who reinforce the fabricated reality. They confuse immunity to criticism with moral superiority. They become constitutionally incapable of apologizing, not because they are too proud, but because admitting fault implies that the foundation upon which their entire self-worth is built is flawed. The winner cannot afford to be wrong, because being wrong means the winner ceases to exist. This fragility weaponizes their relationships. Once an individual identifies entirely with their function, the CEO, the founder, the titan, the people around them transform from partners or colleagues into strategic resources, instruments to be deployed or discarded based on their utility in maintaining the winning state. Empathy, which requires momentarily stepping outside the self-obsessed framework, atrophies completely. The winner begins to view human suffering, especially the suffering caused by their own actions, not as moral data, but as necessary friction. It's the cost of doing business. It's collateral damage in the holy war of their own perpetual advancement. They develop a staggering cognitive dissonance, the ability to lecture on the virtues of vision while simultaneously engaging in brutal, small-minded power plays that would shame a common street thug. This is the paradox of high-level corruption. It is often characterized not by grand Machiavellian schemes, but by banal, entitled cruelty directed at those who can't fight back. The winner is not merely ambitious, they are fundamentally transactional, viewing loyalty as a temporary fee and ethics as a PR expense. The underlying horror they conceal is the realization that the system they dominate is fundamentally arbitrary. If success is purely meritocratic, then they are a genius. If it is capricious, if it relies on luck, inherited advantage, or political maneuvering, then their reign is temporary, and their sacrifices meaningless. The winner fears the chaotic truth of randomness more than they fear any specific competitor. To acknowledge luck, systemic advantage, or the sheer fragility of their current position would be to introduce doubt, and doubt is the psychological acid that dissolves the winner's fortified identity. To combat this ever-present, terrifying possibility of cosmic meaninglessness, they double down on control. They micromanage the narrative, they crush dissent, and they attempt to retroactively rewrite history, claiming that every fortunate accident was, in fact, an inevitable stroke of genius. The truth they suppress is this: the higher the achievement, the more profound the fear of the fall, because the altitude has made them incapable of surviving the landing. If this cold, analytical dissection of the powerful, the truth behind the gilded throne, is the kind of unflinching content you believe deserves to exist, pause here and subscribe. We rely entirely on this community to keep bringing these diagnoses forward, uncompromised by the very forces we are attempting to expose. What they are truly running from is silence. The quiet moment when the deal is signed, the crowd is gone, and they are left alone with the internal balance sheet of their soul. They are haunted by the inventory of severed relationships, abandoned principles, and moments of genuine joy sacrificed at the altar of expansion. This inventory is too heavy to carry, so they mandate constant, deafening noise, the next acquisition, the next crisis, the next public feud, anything to drown out the internal reckoning. The escalation is not aimed at maximizing profit. It is aimed at psychological survival. They are trapped in a self-imposed prison of maximal achievement, perpetually running forward simply to avoid the implosion that waits behind them. The winner effect is, in the end, a sophisticated form of profound, self-inflicted loneliness, dressed up in the expensive clothing of material victory. They are defined by the very emptiness they created in the pursuit of fullness. And the final, definitive verdict is this: they win the world, and in the process, they lose the only self that was ever capable of enjoying it. They achieved ultimate freedom only to realize that the cage was built from the inside. If you want to continue exploring the deep psychological flaws that define our world, hit that subscribe button, join this ongoing analysis, and help us build a community that values truth over spectacle. The true cost of the winner effect is the irreversible erosion of perspective. The final, definitive verdict on this pathology is not that the winners are fundamentally evil, but that they have become psychically allergic to the concept of enough. Their drive transforms from an engine of progress into an autoimmune disorder, where the self begins attacking its own boundaries, its own capacity for quiet contentment. We look at the Titans and ask, why don't they stop? The answer is chillingly simple. Stopping would mean acknowledging the terrifying emptiness that the pursuit was meant to fill in the first place. The escalation is not a choice. It is a metabolic necessity dictated by the hyper-stimulated reptilian brain that has become normalized to unsustainable levels of dopamine and power-induced stress hormones. They cannot stop because the cost of inertia, the sudden crushing realization of what they have sacrificed, is infinitely higher than the cost of motion. They are not merely trapped by the system they built, they are trapped by the chemistry of victory, perpetually chasing a synthetic peace that retreats with every step forward. What we must understand, the essential truth that shields us from falling into this same gilded trap, is that the ultimate freedom is not the freedom to do anything, but the profound, almost impossible freedom to stop. The ability to define your own finish line, to consciously reject the next available conquest, is the highest form of personal sovereignty. Those who have won everything have irrevocably surrendered that power. They are victims of their own success, defined by the constant, exhausting need to defend a summit they no longer have the perspective to truly appreciate. They are the cautionary tale whispered across history. The person who becomes a god only to realize that immortality means eternal, isolated management of their own legacy. The greatest tragedy is watching someone achieve everything they ever wanted, only to discover that they forgot to want the things that actually matter. The highest achievement in the modern world is not the acquisition of wealth or power, but the stubborn, almost revolutionary maintenance of one's own internal architecture against the forces that demand endless, meaningless expansion. The true winner is the one who refuses to play the final, fatal game. If you found yourself nodding along to this diagnosis, recognizing the subtle psychological warfare waged against our perspective, and you believe in the necessity of a space dedicated to serious, unapologetic analysis of the human condition, then join us. Hit that subscribe button and become part of the community committed to dissecting the gilded prisons of the modern age. The final verdict, then, is this: the only escape from the relentless tyranny of more is the calculated refusal to define your worth by external metrics. The system demands that you view yourself as an infinite capacity machine, always ready for the next upgrade, the next acquisition, the next war. But the wisdom that protects us is simpler, brutal, and counterintuitive. The highest achievement is the moment you draw a sacred perimeter around your internal life and declare, with absolute finality, this is enough. The modern tragedy is believing that the finish line is a destination. It is not. It is a conscious decision. The truly free individual is the one who understands that your greatest asset is not your capital or your time, but your attention, the last sovereign territory you possess. Guard it fiercely, for the battle being waged is not for the resources of the earth, but for the purity and definition of your internal state. Do not let the pursuit of external victory destroy the only thing you truly own. This channel exists to arm you for that internal fight, to provide the intellectual ballast against the forces of endless expansion, and to help us collectively recognize the signal through the noise of manufactured desire. If these ideas resonate, if you feel the deep necessity of a community dedicated to analyzing the hidden costs of success and the profound psychology of stopping, then make sure you are subscribed. Join us, and never mistake movement for progress again. The true final verdict is this: the infinite game is a sucker's bet designed to keep you permanently leveraged against your own happiness. The moment you achieve enough, you become irrelevant to the machinery of expansion, and in that irrelevance, you find your only true power. Freedom is not the opportunity to choose between 10,000 different products. It is the radical realization that you do not need any of them to be whole. The world will call your satisfaction stagnation, your contentment cowardice, and your refusal to climb a failure of ambition. Let them. They cannot touch the inner sanctum where you have already won. Your job is not to win the external race. Your job is to recognize that the finish line was a mirage, and the real victory lies in stepping off the track entirely. This is the hardest psychological task of the modern era: to find glory in the subtle art of subtraction, to embrace the scarcity of your time and attention as a weapon, and to declare your own intrinsic worth independent of the marketplace. This deliberate act of philosophical secession is where the real work begins. If you are ready to stop chasing shadows and start building the internal infrastructure for a life lived on your own terms, a life that the system cannot measure, control, or exploit, then join the serious thinkers who are already here. We are building an intellectual resistance against manufactured scarcity and endless expansion. Hit subscribe now, and let's continue to decode the hidden mechanics of influence and escape the tyranny of the infinite. The final irony of the infinite game is that the truly wealthy are those who no longer require anything external to justify their existence. They have exchanged the frantic energy of acquisition for the quiet, unshakable dignity of being enough. The only sustainable currency is your internal peace, and you achieve it not by adding more to your life, but by savagely defending the borders of your attention against everything that demands your striving. This is the ultimate rebellion: to look at the altar of endless optimization and choose instead profound stillness. Let them call it defeat. We know it is the genesis of true personal sovereignty. If you understand that the highest form of success is the mastery of your own desires, and if you are ready to stop chasing shadows and start building the internal infrastructure for a life lived on your own terms, a life that the system cannot measure, control, or exploit, then join the serious thinkers who are already here. We are building an intellectual resistance against manufactured scarcity and endless expansion. Hit subscribe now, and let's continue to decode the hidden mechanics of influence and escape the tyranny of the infinite.